All right, hello, and welcome everyone to the Digitrainer 4.0 podcast, where we will be exploring the evolving frontiers of education, innovation, and all those digital tools that are transforming the way that we teach and the way that we learn. I am your host for today, Kevin Spiteri, and today we're diving into one of the most exciting yet controversial topics that are on everybody's lips today, which is artificial intelligence. Joining me over here is somebody who truly embodies the intersection of technology and teaching, Mr. Klaus Conrad. Klaus is a leading ed tech consultant and the founder of Headstart technology in Malta, a person who is passionate and is an advocate for digital transformation in the classroom, and a trainer who's helped countless educators bring the future into their present. So, Klaus, I just want to, can you give me a little bit of an introduction on who are you, what do you do, what is Headstart Technologies, and what is your role in this digital transformation of digital education today?
So, that's a lot of questions, but what I am, at heart, a geek. I've always loved technology. Technology has been all my life. I've also always loved education. I trained as a teacher, spent some years teaching, quickly realized that there are many problems in teaching, especially in public education. Moved into corporate IT. Spent many years working abroad in Silicon Valley, in Canada, Toronto, or with Silicon Valley companies. And a couple of years ago, 10 years ago at this point, I set up Headstart Technology because education was still always in my mind. And Headstart Technology was born out of basically the realization when I was with my kids and I saw what they were doing in terms of digital skills and digital education at school. Honestly, I was shocked. I was really, really shocked. 10 years behind industry and 10 years behind real world needs. So that sort of got me thinking, like, what can I do about it? And turns out, actually, I could do something about it because I had both the technology background, I had education background. And initially, Headstart started off organizing after-school classes, summer schools, and so on for kids, focused on robotics, on coding, and similar topics. But very quickly, I realized that that would only impact X amount of students because one guy can only do so much. The bigger impact is if we can reach teachers. So I pivoted a little bit towards focusing on teacher training, teacher education. And today we are, I think it's safe to say, one of the leading private institutions in Malta focused exclusively on professional development for teachers.
All right. Okay, so it's nice to see that a lot of similarities between my background and yours, sort of say merging your passion of geekiness and all the digital gadgets and stuff like that with your profession as well. All right, I want to get straight to the point today and start talking about AI, artificial intelligence. So just to set the scene a little bit right now, can you give me what your definition is of AI within the context of education? And then follow up a little bit with what do you think teachers should understand about it beyond the hype, beyond the noise that there is out there?
So, definition for AI in education. I'm going to give you actually a definition for AI, not for AI in education, from the American Heritage Dictionary, which is one that I refer to a lot. It's that AI is the ability of a computer, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, computer or machine to do tasks that we would typically think of as involving intelligence. Okay? And I love that definition because even though, if we had more technical people here, they might disagree or they might find slightly different angles. I think this definition beautifully encapsulates sort of what people typically think of as AI, which is a smart computer. And I think it also very nicely encapsulates what the problem is going to be for AI in education. Because if a machine can do stuff that we typically think of as being intelligent, that's what teachers do often. We take students, we teach them things, and we hope to see signs of intelligence, back from that process. And it raises all sorts of problems, because if a machine can do what we are teaching kids to do, why should kids learn how to do it? Because if history has shown us anything, is that if a machine can do something, a machine will do something. So I think that for me really helps sort of frame the discussion. Now, in terms of what educators need to know about AI, is that it's not going away. Because with many technological sort of innovations and revolutions in education, there are always a few people whose default mode of approaching it is to stick their head into the sand and hope it goes away. AI is not going away. The genie is out of the bottle, for better or for worse, and not everything is positive about it. And the future has many questions, I think, about it in terms of AI and the impact on education. But the one thing I can be fairly certain about is that AI is never going away.
All right. I like what you said with regards to the part of, like if history is sort of like a place where we can learn some lessons from that, when machines can take over something that a human can possibly do through intelligence, then we know that that is what it's going to follow. And so when it comes to the topic of education 4.0, tackling industry 4.0 and the industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, I mean, this is basically what we're talking about over here. All right, so talking a little bit about how it's not going to go away and how it's already with us right now. How has AI, from at least from your experience, how has AI already started to change the way that the classrooms operate today, both in Malta and anywhere else? So what have you seen until now?
So I think the biggest area where AI has impacted right now is in terms of teacher-facing work. So teachers have discovered that basically with AI, a lot of the tasks that they normally have to do, such as, for example, writing lesson plans, creating resources, have become a lot easier. So we are seeing both a greater quantity, sometimes a better quality, not always, but definitely I think a lot of excitement around the fact that a lot of the stuff that teachers typically do in terms of preparing for the classroom are helped a lot with AI tools. In terms of the impact of AI in the classroom, I think that is still coming. And that is still coming because I think in a lot of schools, there's a lack of direction. School leadership might not yet be fully aware of just how fundamentally important this shift is going to be. I think governments overall are very good at talking about the amazing potential of AI, but haven't really translated it yet into anything tangible. Of course, there are isolated cases where AI is already being used, and I think very successfully as well. But I think the real impact will happen over the next few years. And I think the real dramatic shifts will probably happen in the next... It's difficult to predict the future. I mean, I don't want to pretend like I'm Nostradamus or anything. I think the fog of uncertainty is very heavy nowadays with AI. But let's say I would be surprised if in 5 years' time we have a conversation like this and we're talking about how AI might affect the classroom. I think it will have heavily affected the classroom.
All right. Okay, sticking to the point with what you said, that it's already sort of impact what happens, let's say, before class with regards to planning and other things, and that maybe not as much in the class, let's say, as a widespread adoption yet, but I'm pretty sure that we're already seeing it within our own context of how it is actually affecting how the classroom operates. So thinking about what is available and what is already being used today, or else maybe some of the things which you have already been seeing in your experience, what would you say are some of the practical AI tools that teachers can start using as of now? So like today, especially those who aren't really tech savvy, okay? So those are the ones who are not really, let's say, like the ones who you were saying, they're just trying to stick their head in the sand and stay away from it. So what would you say are some of the practical tools that they can actually use as from now?
I mean, the place to start is undoubtedly large language models. So ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, all of these tools that are basically designed to be natural language, interact by talking to them or by typing to them. They are actually designed, and I think this is something that people really have to appreciate and understand. There's a reason why ChatGPT has been the most adopted app ever in the history of the internet. It's not because it's only very good at what it does. It is because it's extremely simple to use. There is no training involved. So I sometimes shock teachers who come to me for training on AI by telling them you don't have to be here because you can just use most of these tools without any specific training. Of course, you can go to training and learn how to use them a little bit better, but anyone can get started. And in fact, there was a report recently by, actually last year or the year before at this point, by, I think it was Gartner, where they actually said that across all industries, not only education, ChatGPT, for example, and large language models have been the single most adopted tool ever in the history of the industry, so to speak. Everybody's playing with it, from lawyers to doctors to teachers, And the reason for that is that they are designed to be really simple to use. Now, of course, there are then other apps as well. So, for example, there is value in specialization. So, for example, if I'm a language teacher, Twee is a fantastic app. Why? Because it is specifically designed for the type of workflow that language teachers would typically have. So you can generate the kind of exercises that you have very quickly, professionally. You can do the same thing with ChatGPT or with Copilot or any of the other tools, but it might take a little bit longer. The formatting might not be perfect. So what we are seeing more and more of now is that there are, we're going through a period where companies are developing more and more specialized tools for very specific areas of education. So for example, another one of my favorite tools is, for example, wiuth.ai, which is a fantastic tool for anyone working on data visualization, statistics, and so on. It actually makes, I can't believe I'm saying this, it actually makes data analysis fun, because you can just ask questions about, a bunch of numbers, a bunch of data. Now, I come from a data background, so for me this was even more sort of impressive because I know how difficult it used to be. I know that there are companies billion-dollar companies that have basically built their own business model on making it easy for big companies to understand data. And here comes a website where basically anyone can just upload a bunch of data and just ask, hey, tell me something about this data. And it will actually give you useful feedback. I mean, that is amazing. That is great. Now, are there AI apps for every single subject, every single sort of approach and so on? Not yet, but I'm pretty sure that if there's a demand for them, there will be. Because this is the golden age of basically anyone who has even a little bit of technical understanding of AI, who's able to build a custom chatbot or a custom application. Everybody's looking around and saying like, I wonder if I can build something for those people who don't have something yet. So I think there will be a huge swathe of apps soon that are already. In fact, one of the most challenging things, for example, for training on AI, as a trainer, is that every time we do the course, we have to redo the course because the apps have changed, because new stuff is out there. Every week, let's not exaggerate, let's say every month, you have to go back and not only check if there's something new, but you also have to check what has changed in the ones that are already out there, because everything is moving so incredibly quickly. And I think that is also part of the problem. Things are moving so incredibly quickly. It's difficult to keep up, and it can be daunting for people to understand what they should be looking at. But for me, the advice I would give is, you can't really go wrong by starting off with ChatGPT or Copilot or any of these other models. Claude, for example, is a really great engine to get started with. There's another great tool, for example, for research and searching called Perplexity, which is really great. Maybe one challenge we're starting to see now is that many of these tools are no longer free. They were moving towards a freemium model where you get a little bit, and then once you're hooked, you have to pay. So people are still adapting to that. And then once you identify exactly what type of help you need in your daily work, then you might be able to find more specialized apps. So Twee for language teachers, for example. There is, let me see. I mean, what other subjects can we take?
Fireflies for note-taking, for
Firefly for
example.
note-taking.
There's a whole load of things right now at the moment.
So many apps.
All right. It's interesting what you picked up on with regards to the data analysis kind of thing, because I remember when I started off with, let's say, digital literacy, and you're looking at the 4 Cs, and looking at this new dawn of digital education, basically, and digital citizenship. I remember one of the mantras that we used to talk about before is that we are preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist. And I also remember that when they used to ask me to reflect and think, like, okay, so try to think back, for example, let's say 5-10 years ago. Think about jobs that there are here today, but which were not there 10 years ago. So if you look back 10 years, and in those times, the iPhone wasn't around, applications weren't around and stuff like that. And I remember that through my research and creating one of the presentations, one of the jobs which came up was big data analyst.
A data scientist.
Or a data scientist, which, so yeah, it didn't exist in those days.
But now it's one of the hottest jobs.
It's one of the hottest jobs, and now with the tools which you're talking about,
it might not
even be necessary anymore. So,
because you said that sort of golden phrase that we've been hearing for many years, like we need to prepare students for jobs that do not yet exist.
Today, yeah.
The problem we have now in education is that, unfortunately, there's a very real chance we are preparing kids for jobs that will no longer exist by the time they finish.
That's it.
That is the uncomfortable and difficult truth to accept.
I mean, like we said, it's exciting and it is controversial as well. You know what I mean? And the speed at which things are, developing and everything. However, okay, yes, we are seeing new applications opening up every single month. More recently now, it's even the same applications evolving in different ways that it can do things that it did not do before. All right, now, one of the things that you picked up on over here, I think, was the simplistic, let's say, the easy access to these tools for people who are not tech savvy, and so the easy way that you can speak to a large language model, basically, and just try to get whatever you need out of it. And I find this particularly interesting for certain people, like you mentioned, who are not that tech savvy, particularly certain teachers. And at least locally, I know that we have quite a few boundaries when it comes to this. Okay, why? Aging population, people who are of, let's say, of a different sort of, let's say, background, that maybe are not too open to new things and change and everything like that. However, even though it was, for example, let's say, as an academic manager, very difficult for me to implement something like these interactive whiteboards or interactive panels, I have found that AI, with that sort of segment of the working population, has actually been something which, even though initially I might have been a bit skeptical, it was a little bit easier to introduce to them because of the ease of use. All right, the fact that you can actually speak to a large language model in the same way that you would speak to a person.
But there's also one very important difference there, which is, unlike many of those other technologies you mentioned, AI has a direct, immediate benefit for the teacher themselves. It's it's a very selfish benefit, because if you get a new shiny whiteboard or monitor or whatever in the classroom, it's just more stuff in the classroom. Mm-hmm. But if you suddenly can save yourself an hour of time preparing your work, that's important.
Yeah, and I think that is something which has helped in a lot of different ways, because like what you were saying with regards to lesson planning, and I want to get onto the practical examples very soon, but I think this is one thing which hit really, really hard locally, at least, is the fact that one of the major gripes of teachers in general are the extra hours that are unpaid. You know what I mean? So the hours that they spend at home developing materials, lesson plans, and so on and so forth. And it's also a major gripe for the academic management because of the, let's say, how, the attitude towards the position and the attitude towards the job, because, we've got all this time which is unpaid and this and that. And so it creates a little bit of a negative kind of atmosphere, which I hesitate to make that sweeping statement that this has wiped that problem away, but I do feel that this has targeted this problem quite interestingly. So on that point, with regards to the ease of access and everything, can you walk us through maybe a real world example of where AI significantly improved learning outcomes, has helped the classroom in a certain way, has provided more value to the teacher, more engagement to the students? So something practical. So how can a teacher today, after listening to this podcast, sit down at a computer, or maybe even pause it right now after the segment, get onto one of these things and do something that is actually useful?
So,
what would you recommend a teacher, an activity, an exercise to carry out right now and try something out? What would you say that they should do?
So, what I would recommend is that teachers analyze exactly what the biggest resource is that they don't have. Okay, let's start from there. And almost always, the one thing that there's never enough of is time. So think about what kind of activity would be beneficial to you to do differently so that you get more time back. Because time you can't buy, you can't rent, you can't make. You only get it back by not doing something that you're already doing. Now, if we think of a typical classroom, there are many areas where you have time that you spend before the classroom. So all the stuff you mentioned, lesson planning, resource creation, all of those things. Should you use AI to help you with that? Absolutely. Why not? Because there is also maybe an uncomfortable truth in a lot of the stuff there, which is, you and me both know this. Many teachers, they prepare lots of lesson plans, and then they might keep those lesson plans for a very long time, because once you've prepared them, they're there. But we also know that many good teachers, many good trainers, you go in with a script in your head, but that script goes out of the window sort of the minute you are in front of the class and you see an opportunity to take the lesson in a certain direction or to interact or engage with the student. So a lot of the stuff that is often prepared, a lot of it you need to have, because if somebody comes and wants to see what you are doing, you need to have. But in practice, you need to be quick and agile in producing resources you need. For example, we haven't spoken about personalized learning. I mean, personalized learning without AI is a pipe dream that we've been talking about for 30 years, and nobody does properly. And it's not blaming the teacher for not doing it properly. It's just because you're only human. You know, there's only so much you can do in the time that you have. So if we take time as the number one sort of constraint that is hindering our ability to innovate in the classroom, then anything that gives us time back is good. So, rephrasing it a little bit, are there activities in our classroom that we are currently doing synchronously in the classroom that we can do asynchronously without losing quality? And there are some fantastic tools to do exactly that. So, for example, if you're a primary school teacher, you are teaching literacy to your class. And right now, for example, you do an exercise where every few lessons you tell your students, you know, Johnny, you read this line. And they start reading. And then next one. And you take up the whole lesson, basically every child speaking or reading for a minute or two, because that's the maximum that you can afford. Is that enough? No. And literacy rates and everything scores what they are. We know
you have a lot of
enough.
stagnant children, basically people not doing anything.
Exactly.
And so you don't have 100% engagement during 100% of the time.
So, one possible solution to that is, for example, Microsoft has just released last year a fantastic AI-powered tool called Reading Progress, which is built into Microsoft Teams, where teachers can assign reading passages for kids to do at home. And the way it works is that the kids read out the text, they record themselves at the same time with the camera and microphone. Then, if they did that, many teachers might be sort of confused at this point, like, how is that going to save me any time? Right? Because I would still have to watch the video. And we've had tools in the past, like Flipgrid, for example, that allowed you to do this without AI. So where does AI come in? Because what the AI does is once they upload that text, it will actually scan the recording and analyze it and identify exactly, for example, where there are problems of pronunciation, where there are omitted words, where there are, like, what is the feedback that the teacher should be thinking about in relation to this exercise that the child performed. So when the teacher comes in, they can review that, but instead of spending 10 minutes watching the video, making notes, and then another 10 minutes, 15 minutes typing it up, sending it, or recording a message, they basically see it all already analyzed. They can quickly skim through it, and they can say, like, okay, I know what to discuss with the child, and from, you know, a 30-minute exercise, it's now a 5-minute exercise. So, and the beautiful thing about this approach, and I think this is the correct approach, is that we've actually improved the quality of the experience for the child. Because rather than giving everybody in class a 2-minute exercise just for the sake of saying we did it, now everybody has an equal chance at reading a much longer passage. We can do it much more frequently because we're not taking up classroom time. And at the same time, once we go back to the classroom, we could take what we learned from that. For example, let's say 3/4 of my class have a problem pronouncing a particular word. I can focus on that. So now the quality of the actual education is much better. We've still done the exercise, we've still done the work. AI has helped us make it not only better, but also achieve a much better result in less time. So that is the golden sort of formula. If we can achieve that, that's great. Now, you asked about other apps as well. There is an app, for example, that I absolutely love. Unfortunately, it's not GDPR compliant, so I'm a little bit hesitant to recommend it. But I really, fingers crossed, that either they or somebody like them will develop an app like this. It's such a simple idea, and it's so beautiful. It's an app called Snorkel. I don't know if you've used it.
Not yet, no.
No, it's fantastic. It's probably the single most exciting app I've seen. Now, that's a big claim to make, but let me explain what it is. If I had to ask you, for example, how do you make sure that the student hasn't cheated with ChatGPT when producing an answer? What would be the simplest way for you to check that?
I mean, let's put it this way. The things that coming from my background, I know that there are ways to fool it. I know that there are ways that you can ask ChatGPT, you can press it to turn it in, you can see how much of it has been generated by AI, but there are also ways that you can mask that as well with ChatGPT itself by humanization and so on and so forth.
Yes.
So,
but one way how you can normally catch people who've done that. So let's say a student suddenly went from average to exceptional. Yeah, you call them out in front of the class and you tell them like, okay, tell me what you wrote here. Like explain it to me in your own words. And that's the oh shit moment, right? For many students. So show and tell, like that idea of talking about your ideas, explaining them, is probably the way that is most effective at showing basically the real thinking behind like what the student is producing.
It's kind of like, let's say, the Viva for the...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like a Viva for a thesis or whatever.
The defense of a thesis.
So what Snorkel does is it basically allows a teacher to just put an image on a whiteboard and maybe a little bit of text. So that's the problem. And then the way that the student interacts with it is that they just click on the record button and they draw their ideas or they speak about their ideas. They explain everything. And then when they submit it, the AI will actually evaluate that against a rubric that the teacher creates. So did they mention this point? Did they talk about this? Did they explore this idea? You know? And
so it actually looks at the outcomes basically.
Looks at the outcomes and looks at the explanation and does everything. And it's so incredibly good. I mean, I did an experiment a while back. I wanted to see just how good is it. So I was thinking, what's the craziest sort of exercise I can come up with? So I took a picture of a salesman traveling to Eskimos and trying to sell them fridges, right? And I just put that one picture on the whiteboard. So you have a man in a boat and a bunch of Eskimos and a bunch of fridges. And the text underneath was sell them fridges. That's it. And I just clicked make me an activity from this. And the AI correctly identified that what I was looking at was a kind of consultative sales technique thing or creative thinking lesson, language lesson maybe. And I actually used this exercise with a couple of dozen teachers that I happen to have for training over the past few months. And it works in many languages, so they can all explain it in their own language. That's also very important, very empowering. But what really surprised me was just how good it was at evaluating the critical thinking parts of it. So many people most people on average, they were saying like, how would I sell this? I would explain to them, for example, that the fridge is really good at storing food. Because if you just have ice, the food freezes, right? But they were constantly getting 3 out of 4, not 4 out of 4. Because the AI was kind of saying like, can you think of anything more innovative, more interesting, whatever. Then we had one teacher who actually got a 4 out of 4. You know what his point was? I would sell it to them as a heater. Because what do you really need as an Eskimo in Alaska is a heater. And the fridge gets hot. So not only do you get the benefit of putting food in the fridge and keeping it at the right temperature, but on a cold night, you actually get a heater.
And these results were produced automatically by the application?
The results were submitted, the ideas were submitted by the teachers that were testing this. But the AI correctly interpreted that was a fantastic idea, innovative, critical, showed critical thinking and creativity for precisely the reason that you were turning the problem on its head. You are not selling the fridge for precisely the USPs that we would normally associate with it, but you identified something unique that actually appealed to the customer. And if we can reach that level of sophistication in terms of evaluating thinking, that's amazing. Now, I did have some teachers push back on this, and they said, but can't students simply create a script in ChatGPT and get the right answer and then just repeat it in front of the camera? Yes, but you have to win. I think you have to fight as a teacher the battles you can win. If I have my students at least once go through the effort of reading out aloud a script that they've produced, they have to explain the concept, then at least once they've done that.
Yep.
When the alternative is that all they do with an essay, for example, is copy and paste without reading, that's definitely not as good as at least reading it out once. Yep. So I'll take that win, and I'll be happy with it.
There's still that added extra level, basically, that we are looking at over here. All right, so All right. I think just sort of let's say to sort of let's say recap. I think one of the impressive things is that even in the short time that we would have been talking is that we've looked at the application of AI from pre-class, in class, and now even through assessment, you're looking at post-class as well.
Yeah.
So you've targeted sort of let's say the crucial areas of what it means to actually run a classroom. Now, you mentioned primary, but obviously going through my head while you were talking about that, I'm seeing that even for different age groups. For example, you were talking about the language instruction part, that there's also an application called TalkPal. All right, TalkPal.ai is something which I looked into myself, and it gives you different opportunities for different role plays in different situations. So whether you're at a doctor's office, you're in a hotel, you are ordering a taxi, you are the taxi driver yourself.
Yep.
So I'm seeing it even for training within different jobs as well. And
Vocational
how it can
training.
facilitate.
Vocational training will be basically, is already shifting a lot towards, for example, virtual reality models and simulations. Now, virtual reality plus AI is going to make that experience so much better than what most schools can offer in terms of realistic simulation, that is the future. And there's no if or maybe, in my opinion. It will happen that way because, I mean, it might be difficult for people to appreciate if you've not seen or touched or experienced this. But for example, there are vocational colleges in Germany right now where they teach welding through virtual reality because it's much cheaper and easier to provide a realistic welding stick for the initial thing. So they have a special prop that basically simulates a welding torch. But they are able to get the same feedback as if they were welding with the real thing. So rather than have to spend X amount of money on regular trips down to the real thing, they can do an entire, let's say, 80% of the experience virtually, and then the last part with the real thing when they already know what not to do. You know, and the same model will apply to any vocational training, really.
Yeah.
Because it's safer. This is also a thing we have to keep in mind. Remember, vocational training is not always safe.
Yep.
It can be very dangerous. So the more realistic you make that first experience, but still maintain safety, that's great. But then the intersection now with AI, where AI can be adaptive, where AI can make, a situation unexpected, because the problem with a lot of training right now is that it's prescriptive. You follow a script, the script gets boring after a while, you know what to expect. But if that goes away, and just like real life, you have to react to unexpected things.
And this is where the generative
comes in. In gaming, we have this concept of being in the flow, right, in the zone. If we can, through simulations and AI, achieve that kind of engagement, where you are constantly on high alert, constantly engaged, constantly sort of really focused, but doing something that is actually part of what you should be learning, part of what you should be experiencing, I think that's a future that's
it's kind of
really
like
exciting.
I tried this with the voice function on ChatGPT, the advanced voice.
Yes.
All right, and I had a couple of teachers, basically, who wanted to see, okay, so what can it do? Like in its simple, most basic form right now, what can it do? And I just gave an instruction. Okay, I want you to pretend that you are a patient, for example, and that I am a doctor. Okay, so I want you to come to me with some of your ailments, basically tell me what you're feeling, and I'm going to try to give you some advice myself as a doctor. Now, obviously, I am not a doctor. And I said, and at the end of the conversation, I would tell you to end the conversation. I want you to give me feedback on this. And blown away is an understatement with regards to how they were. And it was just a simple prompt telling ChatGPT, saying, listen, I am practicing to be a doctor. I want to have some, let's say, artificial clinical practice. Now, it's not a VR setting or anything like that. It's literally me on my phone with the advanced voice function. And all of a sudden, ChatGPT said, okay, I'm coming here because I have a bit of a headache, a little bit of a fever. And I went back to it and saying, okay, so have you eaten anything different recently? How long has this been going on and everything? And then I gave it some kind of recommendations just to stick to paracetamol, for example. And then it came back to me saying, when you were asking questions, you was right to answer this one, but you should have asked this. So it gave me the feedback. It told me exactly what I shouldn't have said and everything. So it's really impressive. And again, really simple that this was just done over voice. No programming, no special apps. But no special apps. I mean, it is
it is.
ChatGPT. It is a special app.
But you know what? You know what strikes me the most about that, and I totally agree. And my experience with the voice mode has been like every time I use it, I go like, wow, you know. What really impresses me with the voice mode is there is really no limit to what you can do with it. Now I want to be very careful about this. For example, I had a lot of teachers who, when they think about AI, the first thing they tell me, you know, but AI can't do feelings, can't do empathy, can't do emotions. That's not enough. And what do I mean by that? If people think that AI doesn't have emotions, and we can have a long conversation about that, but let's leave it for another day. So the fact is that many humans also don't have empathy and might not be advertising the real emotions that they are feeling. The real question is ChatGPT, for example, with the voice mode, good enough at simulating empathy to an extent where we can actually interact with it and forget that it's not a machine? And I think the answer is yes. And if we accept that, then that creates an even bigger problem then for AI in education, because the sort of the red line that a lot of people seem to always quote when it comes to AI is, but AI can never replace teachers because teachers have empathy, have emotions, have the social connection with the students, and AI doesn't. And my honest answer back to that is, I don't think that's a strong enough argument. Because if it were, then empathy would be on the job requirement for every teacher.
That's
and
true.
It's not.
and this was actually something which was mentioned, I think, recently. I'm trying to remember. I think it was Bill Gates who said that teachers might be replaced. But we'll see. We'll see if
Bill Gates thinks in 10 years there won't be teachers and doctors. 5 or 10 years, actually.
We'll see. We'll see. All right. So talking a little bit about schools. Okay. Now let's see. Okay. So what about getting started with AI in a school? Okay, so we're talking about ideas and everything like that. And like I said, okay, myself and yourself, we've got this quite strong digital background and everything. And because we are intrinsically motivated and interested in these things, we make it a point to integrate it into almost every part of our daily teaching. At least I do myself. But now, when we're looking at a little bit more of wide-scale adoption, and you're looking at educational institutions, what kind of recommendations would you give if a school wants to start integrating AI? What's the first step? What is the first literal step that they need to take to integrate?
The first step, honestly, I think would be to inform themselves really well. And what I mean by that is the worst way to start is to just subscribe to an app or several apps and just let everybody go nuts with it. Because the real challenge for schools especially is that they have to understand, listen, will this improve or degrade the quality of education? Okay, so the biggest danger is, for example, in terms of quality of education, is that teachers will rely so heavily, for example, on ChatGPT or on AI to create the lesson materials that basically the volume increases, but not necessarily the quality. Okay, so keeping the teacher in the loop with AI, is going to be really critical. I think there's also a lot of misunderstandings about AI. Some people tend to be very, I think, falsely positive about AI. AI will solve everything. AI will make everything better. I think it's a very naive way of looking at the future. I think AI can pose very serious challenges to both the security and privacy of students, of teachers, of individuals, and also to long-term job prospects, okay, which I think need to be not only acknowledged, but deeply discussed, and also within a setting of how will AI affect society in general? Because that, I firmly believe that without at least some discussion around these topics, you are basically going to just embrace AI and might not exactly get the kind of results you want. Right? You might be surprised at what comes out of there. Now, in more practical terms, I think my advice would always be, don't ignore ethics. So, encourage your teachers to really rethink how they do their work and anything that can be optimized with AI, not automated, optimized, while still maintaining integrity, quality, and so on. Go for it, because nobody likes bureaucracy, We know that teachers rightly grumble about many of the processes they have to follow at schools, whether it is for preparation of material or assessment or so on. But there needs to be a discussion within the school, and I think it needs to be within the school, because I think different schools will approach this differently, and I don't think waiting for direction from higher up is a good strategy. There needs to be a basic discussion about, for example, what is ethically okay? Where are the red lines? So, for example, a very practical example. Should it be okay for a teacher to upload the student's work to ChatGPT, get ChatGPT to create the feedback, and then for the teacher to send that to the student without checking it? I've had teachers who asked me for exactly this kind of function, the magic button. Like, they want one app that does everything for them, creates resources, does corrections, and at the end of the day, they don't have to do a lot. The real question should be, what does it mean to be a teacher? I mean, is that an essential part of what you're doing as a teacher, and how much of that can you outsource? So I think that discussion needs to be first. Sort of, let's establish amongst ourselves, as colleagues, as an institution, where are the red lines? Is this okay? Do we agree this is okay? If we agree that it's not okay, then let's make sure that we're all accountable for that. So you cannot blame the tool if you do something bad. It's your fault, because we had these rules. And I really believe very strongly that just like with things like GDPR, I mean, it's interesting for me when I ask schools about, do you follow GDPR? Yes, of course we follow GDPR. Okay, but do you follow GDPR? I mean, do you really, really believe in it? Do you do it? I mean, what about this picture you put on Facebook? Like, did you actually get permission for everything? Do you have signed consent? Did you actually think about, like, can you ever delete it if somebody wants it, whatever? Like, it's not enough to pay lip service to the idea. You have to really follow through. And I don't think that any kind of these top-down rules, like GDPR, will actually work, because this is moving much faster than any policy making. So my advice is always to move towards a kind of personal responsibility model. So listen, you can use AI, but you have to use it responsibly. You're a teacher, you're a professional, use it professionally. So if you mess up, you cannot blame the tool.
So you're saying that basically also, obviously, you need to set the ground rules first. You need to do the appropriate research, find out what is acceptable, what is not. And I think it all boils down to somebody making sure that you are taking extremely informed decisions before introducing something like this, because there are things which are not, let's say, necessarily immediately apparent. Okay, so if you take, so for example, myself, being an educator, the minute that I stumbled upon ChatGPT within its first few days of release, I went a little bit crazy with it, obviously, and started seeing like, wow, you can do this and you can do that, and oh wow, look at this. And I'm still like that today, you know what I mean? So like this exciting kid that just discovered something mind-blowing, and every single day I come across certain things. I mean, you said every single month. I'm full-on geek mode on this, so it's almost on a daily basis that I am discovering things. I'm not saying that everything is coming out on a daily basis, but I am discovering things. And I like to keep myself informed. But I had already been using AI within my context for, I would say, at least 3 to 4 months before the topic of ethics ever came up, and the topics of bias ever came up. And it only came up when I was actually requested to deliver training to somebody. And again, I used ChatGPT to help me structure this training, and it advised me to look at the ethics and bias. And I'm like going, all right, so why is it telling me this? And when I started looking into it and then doing my research, and then I started understanding how. But this was from, I was going to be very honest with you, a late adopter into this, like when it came to the ethics and bias kind of side of things. So there is a statement that obviously, okay, AI is extremely powerful, but we can establish that it is not without risks. So, okay, coming from now a teacher's perspective, okay, because obviously once you've laid the ground rules, that is step one. Step two is going to be training.
Step two is going to be training.
Now, when it does come to training, okay, the training on how to use the tools and everything like that, but how can we, or let's start off with, can we ensure that these AI tools aren't reinforcing any kind of bias or widening this digital divide or implementing thoughts or beliefs that may not be aligned with what we are trying to promote. How can we sort of mitigate these ethical and bias-based issues that we are coming across today?
There's a fantastic document that was actually written, amongst other people, by Matthew Montebello, for example, who was one of the contributing experts by the EU, called the Ethical Guidelines for Use of AI in the Classroom by the European Commission. It's a great document. Okay, I refer to it a lot. It starts off by offering guiding questions along these lines. It also has, I think, problems. And one of the problems is that it's not practical to implement in the classroom, in my opinion. Okay, maybe get Matthew over and we can have a discussion one day. The reason why I say that is, for example, one of the points that it raises is exactly what you just said, that it's the teacher's responsibility to know where the bias is in the tool, whether the tool is ethical, how the data is going to be used. I don't see that as a teacher's responsibility because the teacher is not an expert in this area. So the school, and maybe further on, ministries and so on, need to do the exercise of establishing what are safe apps. Like, so for example, I mentioned Snorkel. Snorkel is a great app. And on the website, they have clear statements that say, for example, we don't sell students' data. We don't use students' data for anything. And yet it is not GDPR compliant. As long as it's not GDPR compliant, I cannot recommend it as being used in the EU because we have those rules that supersede that. At least that's my opinion. So that's a start. You know, we need to understand which of these apps are not only cool, but actually safe to use in terms of what's the worst that could possibly happen? Oh boy, lots of bad things can happen. All right, that is why GDPR was created. Because if you had Alex Reck here, for example, talking about the dangers of social media, he would give you an earful about that, and I agree completely with him. Social media has been a disaster, I think, for education and for humanity at large. Let's put it that way. But AI is going to make everything much worse in that sense. So what drives AI is data. So all data is valuable. So as students generate data, as teachers generate data, the data needs to be safeguarded. So we have to start from there. So training is important. Training is important because training can help you, guide you, especially as somebody who's not in the field, towards those apps that are safer than others. But more importantly, I think training can help you find, because the natural instinct of a lot of people in schools is to basically find tools that help them do the same thing they're already doing, but faster, or better, or cheaper. Right? Substitution. That's not enough. The real power of AI is to rethink problems that we've lived with for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, because we've never had a solution for them. So I'll give you a fun example, a fun example and then a serious one. So a fun example is, one of my favorite AI apps is Suno. Why? Because you can make your own songs. You can make your own music. Now, I'm very biased in this. I will declare my bias immediately because I used to be a music teacher. All my kids learn music. All my kids play instruments. Because I really believe that music is important. And spoiler alert, if there's one thing that most students really enjoy in their life, it's music. And yet, it's one of those things that we don't use in education. Not enough, at least. And here comes an app now that allows anybody, including the students, to create music for themselves about any topic that they want. So, you struggle to remember the bones in the hand for biology? Make a song about it. Just like we used to do in kindergarten, Everybody sings songs. I remember singing songs for times tables, long, long time ago. Why do we do that? Because it works. Education has gone a little bit off the cliff sometimes. In my opinion, I will say this very clearly, that education only works if it's fun. I reject it. I reject it just because I know it's not true. And I know it's not true because if I had to ask you, how does one learn an instrument? The only answer is slowly and painfully. There's no other way, right? You can't read a book about it. You can't find a fun way of doing it. It's lots of practice
I think there's a fine line between, or actually rather a bit of a thick line between fun and engagement.
Yes.
And that even though fun is engaging, there are other things which are also engaging.
Exactly. And I think in education, sometimes we've taken this approach that unless it's fun, it's not engaging. My pushback to that would be, as long as it's interesting, it's engaging. But interesting doesn't mean, for example, it has to be easy that it's fun.
It's that state of flow that we were
It's
talking
the state
about.
of
It's
flow.
the mid-range between the
fact,
impossible and the easy, if you know.
If you have a gamer, why do they play a game? Not because it's easy to finish. Quite the opposite, because there's a challenge. In fact, my oldest son, for example, is obsessed with Dark Souls games. Who likes Dark Souls games?
I love them.
Masochists.
I love Souls games.
Yeah, I know.
I know what you mean.
Me too, because I love a challenge.
Yep.
Right? So people who've never experienced this will never understand the beauty of managing that millisecond reaction time. That means you defeat the boss or die.
Yep.
Okay?
And it's that sense of achievement.
That sense of
once
achievement.
you get it, it's the feedback
Exactly.
in the end that, you know.
Now, is it fun?
I've got through that.
Is
and
it
that's
fun?
a little bit about what music is about as well.
Yes,
though, huh?
but is it fun? Not always.
But it's engaging.
But it's frustrating.
But
it's
engaging.
not always fun.
But it's not always fun, no.
Exactly.
No.
And that is my point, that in education, sometimes we've gone too far towards the point that unless it's fun, it's not good. And what AI will change, I think, in that perception is AI works beautifully at, for example, tutoring, at delivering instruction. Why? Because it can both make it engaging, and it makes it engaging by making it because you had asked earlier about adaptive, for example, AI. What does adaptive AI do? It actually calibrates the difficulty so that it's always a little bit difficult, but not so difficult that you fail.
That's it.
Right? Which is the perfect point to be in this game as well.
Ideal level of challenge.
Exactly. So it maintains that ideal level of challenge. It can also, and this is, I think, the game changer, include the fun elements. So, for example, if I have a really fun simulation, a really fun game, that also teaches me at the level that I'm at and pushes me towards the next one, it will do that. But what AI is really effective with is doing it in a way that is fun, but also repeats a lot. Yep. And in education, we've kind of moved away from this idea that repetition is good. But repetition works.
Yes, no. Repetition is crucial in my opinion. That is something which, yes, I mean, it's the drilling, it's the repetition.
You have to have it. But it's considered old-fashioned and bad and boring. And like, if you do that a lot, you're not a good teacher. But the reality is it works. And teachers sometimes can feel like if a student is not engaged, it's their fault. Because they're a bad teacher. Which is also something I reject. Because a good teacher is someone who tries their best to make things interesting and engaging. But they are not miracle workers. So I think this also will be something I think that AI will heavily influence. AI, I think, will shift a lot more of the burden of getting educated. The ownership will be with the student. Because there will be apps that help them learn. There will be tutors that help them achieve better results. But if they are not willing to use them, they will not have an impact. Right now, if a student fails, many parents blame, for example, the teacher. The teacher is not good. Normally, I mean, there could be cases. But very often it turns out that actually the student is just not interested at all, has not made any effort at all, has not tried in any way. There might not be support from the family and so on. But the teacher feels like it's like they are blamed for it. And I think that is really bad. That's also, I think, one of the reasons why teachers leave. Apart from the stress and the burnout and all the work that you mentioned earlier. It's that feeling of helplessness that basically I've tried my best and I can't get 100% of my students to follow. I don't think that's the right thinking.
But do you think AI can fix this?
I think AI will change it if AI becomes the de facto way of actually delivering tuition. Now, that is quite a loaded statement, okay? So I want to make sure I explain that. AI works and AI tutoring works extremely well. In fact, there was a Harvard report a couple of months ago which says that in their research, it's 200% more effective at getting students to reach learning outcomes. That should scare every teacher. Why? Because we care about what we measure. What do we measure? If students reach learning outcomes, if they pass exams, if they get good marks, and so on. If it turns out that AI does a better job at getting students to pass their exams, to pass their tests, all the other talk we normally have about, developing responsible citizens, whatever, starts fading in the background because it becomes a competitive thing now. How can our students be better? I mean, look at what we measure, PISA scores, rankings internationally, That's what we focus on. As governments, that's what the focus is on. Now, we might talk a lot about well-being and so on, but that's still the core.
So, all right, you've actually led me automatically into my next and my final topic, which is basically the future of AI and the role of the educator within all of this. Because you're talking about maybe a potential, hypothetical future, basically over here that, might be better than that. But what do you believe, or how do you see the teacher's role, let's say, immediately? Okay, how do you see the teacher's role evolving in an AI-driven educational landscape?
So I'm going to try to be not too cynical about this. Okay, and then I'll give you the cynical sort of summary later on. The interesting thing about AI in education is that AI actually has the potential to solve many problems. Okay, so if we think of inclusivity, AI is going to be the single biggest game changer in terms of making sure that everybody can participate, consume information, and so on. So tools like, for example, the immersive reader, we've mentioned a lot for people with dyslexia, for example. AI-powered. Remember, AI is not only about generating content or a cool app. It's about working with data, working with solving particular problems. And dyslexia, for example, which affects 1 in 5 of all our students, of all adults as well, can be addressed. Maybe not fixed completely, but life is much better with those kind of tools. I mentioned personalized learning, a pipe dream for 50 years. In theory, everybody says, of course we do personalized learning. In practice, every teacher goes like, how, right? I don't have time to do 20 individual lesson plans for 20 students across 3 classes. You're only human, right? So AI has the potential to really help with that. We can introduce, for example, personalized tutors that sit with a child, metaphorically, sit with a child, learn everything about the child, know exactly what the strengths and weaknesses are. And when I say child, it's not only children, it can be anybody, adults as well. So with the learner. And create and help to create the ideal, interactive, high-flow, super interesting and engaging sort of matrix of interaction points, let's put it that way, where you are constantly getting something out of that interaction that is education. Let's say, now, that 200% I mentioned, why does that work so well? Because AI is really good at repeating and drilling down on the areas you have not yet understood, but doing it in a way that's really engaging. And AI has basically as much time as we have for it. Whereas in a classroom, the teacher does not have as much time for you as a learner as you might have for that, or for the particular problem you have. So in a way, it is inevitable that AI will come into the classroom and into education to address these problems, because these are real problems that we have no good solution for. There is a solution to personalized learning. Employ a teacher for every child. Maybe employ a teacher for every 2 children. So, easy solution, right? Why hasn't it happened? Money. Policy, right? I think AI will also, maybe here becoming a little bit more cynical. I think AI will also lay bare a little bit the fundamental conflict there is between, people like Dewey, for example, wrote about this, the fundamental conflict between schooling and education. So schooling as a social function of babysitting, so that, we saw this during COVID. Schools are an essential function, because if schools are closed, parents cannot go to work. So society needs schools, but a school can mean different things to different people. So looking at it purely from a societal perspective, a social function, we need a place to leave kids so they are safe. We get them back unharmed at the end of the workday. We can go to work. And hopefully in that period when they are at school, they also learn stuff, right? Now, obviously, if you are in a school, if you're an educator, if you're within that world, you see school as something much more noble, right? A place to educate, a place to bring out the best in children, a place to develop the citizens of the future, all of those nice things. But right now, there is this sort of hypocrisy in the system that while we say that, for example, 21st century skills are super important, what we focus most on is teaching them stuff that might be completely irrelevant in a couple of years, right? The point we made earlier. So how are we going to address that? You mentioned in a couple of years. I will tell you what's happening already. So there's already a school, a private business school in the UK, that launched their first teacherless classroom.
I've read about that.
Yeah. So how does it work? You've got VR headsets, you've got AI systems. The students basically get all of their tuition, all of their input, all of their information from these AI systems, interactive games, interactive quizzes. They sit there and they basically go through the material and interact that way. They are supported not by teachers. They are supported by what is being called learning coaches. And this is where my cynical smile comes back, okay? It's my cynical smile. What are learning coaches? Learning coaches is this idea that you will have individuals in the classroom who are going to focus with the kids on, or with the learners, on social skills, on soft skills, let's call them that, sort of all the stuff that AI can't do yet because there's no physical manifestation of the AI. There's nobody to interact with physically, right? There's no team dynamic. There's no communication amongst other humans. And what is really interesting about this approach is that industry has been saying for many years that's what schools should focus on. Schools should focus on really developing these 21st century skills and things like, for example, just basic respect, taking ownership for work, timekeeping, project management, right? But not facts, because facts are less important. Like technical skills are less important because by the time they finish their education, those skills are probably out of date, right? So this new model kind of says, yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. We're giving you the best education in terms of facts using AI because AI will always be more up to date, have more access to information than an individual teacher would have. But that also means that the concept of a teacher doesn't exist anymore. Now we have learning coaches. Now I'm cynical about that because probably learning coaches will be less qualified, less paid teachers, right? And I think that's a very sad future for education. But it is not an unrealistic one. I want to be clear. I don't support the idea necessarily, but I also don't dismiss it because it does solve many issues and it does redirect education towards where maybe the focus should be. The real challenge, of course, is going to be, can we find a middle ground where educators are still valued for what they do? But first we have to define exactly what is it that educators do. Because very often, the answer to that question is very waffly. Right? Oh, we do so many things. If Musk walked into your office Monday morning and tells you, like, tell me why I should not fire you, which is what they're doing in the US right now, what's your answer? I do lots of touchy-feely stuff. No, that's not a good answer. Empathy is not a good answer. Like, you can't measure that. This is the point I wanted to make earlier, that I think educators need to think very, very seriously. Schools need to think very, very seriously about what is it that is uniquely necessary to have in the classroom in terms of the human element, right? Then let's make sure that we keep that. Let's acknowledge also very seriously and realistically where the shortcomings are. And let's try to find ways how we can plug those shortcomings without necessarily losing the human element. My fear is that if schools are seen by some people, especially in policymaking positions, politicians and so on, as primarily a social function, a place to leave kids, and what we really want out of those places are well-educated individuals. And by well-educated, we mean people who pass exams and who can become researchers, scientists, the push towards STEM and so on, or highly capable vocational workers, right? So it doesn't matter what subject we are talking about. But if we are looking purely as school, as a function of producing workers, then actually AI will do a much better job at achieving that particular function. And the role of the teaching part, of the wider human aspect of it, needs to be really well defined for it to be valuable, because we're not currently measuring that very well. Right?
All right.
That's the thing that worries me a bit.
All right, but you still see obviously the marriage between the physical and the digital over here,
It's
that it's not
inevitable.
going to completely take over. All right, so I want to thank you very much for joining us today, Klaus. It's
Pleasure.
been, enriching, educational, it's been practical. We've gone through, I think, let's say, most of the stuff that, let's say, are on everybody's lips at the moment when it comes to AI. Before we close this off, and I'd like to thank everyone for watching this as we went through this podcast for the past bit of amount of time. Do you have a closing statement? Do you have anything that you can tell the public out there? So something which encompasses all of this with regards to the attitude or a recommendation on how we need to approach AI as educators, as global citizens, as European citizens?
I think AI is much bigger than just education. I mean, AI is going to reshape society. And I think it's everybody's responsibility to ask themselves, what kind of society, what kind of future do I want for myself and for my kids? If this question is left to industry, we will not like the answer. That is the strongest statement I can make about this, because industry is self-serving. Industry will look at optimizing cost, or cutting cost, optimizing processes, and that will not be in favor of society in general. Right? And we are seeing a lot of this play out right now also in the US. I used to tell my teachers and students often, like, this could happen. Now I just need to tell them, turn on the news, and you're seeing it happen in real time. So what I'm very worried about, in a way, is that there's a lot of apathy about this. Like, people know about AI. They know AI is coming. They're seeing all the cool features that AI can do. But there's not enough discussion, I think, at an everyday sort of kitchen table, household level. Like, what's the future going to actually look like? Once robots become the norm, once AI automation and robot automation hits the street, once a lot of job sectors just disappear. Yes, okay, we keep hearing new jobs will be created. But what the dirty secret is, it's very unlikely that an equal number of jobs, of new jobs, will be created to replace the number that will be lost. So what is the future going to look like? Topics like universal basic income need to be front and center of discussions. Do people really understand what that means? Do people really think that it's a good idea? Most people I speak to, once they really understand what it means, that basically you are getting paid because there's nothing you could contribute to society that anyone would pay you for, they don't like that idea very much. They don't like that future very much. So is that the kind of future we want? But right now, it seems like all of this future direction is being driven by the people creating the AI. And many of them are young, ambitious, and not necessarily ethically founded, or let's say morally very founded or anchored people. They are looking at profit first and the impact later. And I don't think that's a good place to be. So that would be my advice. Like, read up, discuss, talk, start a discussion, start thinking about what the future should look like, and more importantly, what kind of future you don't want to have. Because this is not going away.
Thank you very much, Klaus.
Very
Thank you
welcome.
for your time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll hope to see you at the next episode.